long before the red flags, the firing squads, and the broken palaces, long before the statues fell and the Tsar's name was erased, there was snow and silence, and an empire standing very, very still. Tonight, you'll drift through the full story of the Russian Revolution, from opulent winters to bread riots, from royal ballrooms to basement walls. This is a second-person journey, not just history told, but history felt. So let your breath fog the windows. Let the snow settle around you, and let the story unfold as you fade gently into sleep. You stand beneath a sky of pure steel. No stars tonight, only clouds thick with snow and the echoes of 1,000 unspoken complaints. This is Russia sometime in the late 1800s, though it may as well be 100 years earlier. The empire is vast, larger than any sensible person would bother to govern. But here you are, part of its weary soul. From the icy ports of Vladivostok to the swampy alleys of St. Petersburg, the land groans like an overworked beast. And somewhere far off in the gilded echo chamber of the Winter Palace, a Tsar rules as though it's still the 1600s. You feel that distance between palace and peasant, between faith and hunger. The man who presides over all this is Alexander III, a slab of a man with a jaw made of brick and policies forged from iron. He believes in orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, the sacred trinity of state propaganda. And who are you to argue? You can't read, not yet anyway. Alexander's empire is an edifice built on silence and snow. The nobles smile at balls, the peasants bend at the waist, and the Cossacks patrol like ghosts on horseback. But under this brittle facade, something stirs. Railroads, that most treacherous of 19th century inventions, begin to weave their way across the steppe. Ideas hitch a ride. Marx, Engels, that whole dusty band of bearded theorists, they sneak into the Russian consciousness like rats on a grain ship. Not that you notice. Not yet. In the countryside, the mujiks, those long-suffering peasants, till the soil like their fathers did, like their grandfathers did, and wonder if their sons will die in the same muddy rows. You hear whispers about land reform. Promises were made after serfdom was abolished in 1861, but let's just say those promises aged about as well as a cabbage in July. You still owe rent, you still owe taxes, you still owe your firstborn to hunger. Meanwhile, the industrial cities bubble with a different discontent. You wander through a textile factory in Moscow, watching 12-year-olds lurch beside clanking machines. The air tastes like grease and coal. There's no music here, only coughing and the occasional scream when someone loses a finger. Progress, they call it, a Western miracle imported at gunpoint. Historians still argue whether Russia was truly ready for modernity, or whether modernity simply kicked down the door, drank all the vodka, and left chaos behind. Either way, by the 1890s, the empire is wheezing under the weight of contradiction. A medieval monarchy perched atop a partially industrialized economy, stuffed with peasants dreaming of land and intellectuals dreaming of revolution. And then there's you, a nobody, a child of the empire. You stand in line for bread, you dodge police truncheons, and you listen, really listen, as people begin to ask dangerous questions out loud. What if the Tsar isn't God's chosen? What if the nobles don't deserve their palaces? What if things could change? The Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police, are already onto this. You watch them drag a man away for owning a banned book. No trial, no fuss. He disappears into the system like tea into samovar water. But even repression has its limits. Ideas are tricky that way. They don't obey borders or uniforms. They fester in exile and bloom in prison. One exile in particular, a sickly man with a receding hairline and a taste for dialectics, begins to make waves from abroad. His name, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. But you can call him Lenin. You'll hear more from him soon, trust me. For now, though, you wait. The Romanov dynasty still struts through gilded halls. The Orthodox Church still chants its prayers, and the Russian people still sleep under heavy quilts, dreaming uneasy dreams of food, freedom, and fire. Something is coming. You can smell it in the smoke, but not tonight. Tonight, the empire slumbers. The year is 1861, and your boots are stuck in the mud of a history book footnote. You're somewhere in the countryside, brushing elbows with famine, praying to saints that never quite answer. But today something different happens. A proclamation rolls through the village like thunder in a bottle. The serfs are free. Or at least, that's what the paper says. The reality? A bureaucratic sleight of hand so clever, even Houdini would have tipped his hat. You're not a serf anymore, sure, but now you're just a peasant with redemption payments. Freedom, it seems, comes with an invoice. This is the reformist dream of Alexander II, a man known, depending on who you ask, as either the Tsar liberator or the guy who nearly fixed things before exploding. He believes, rather quaintly, that Russia can modernize without losing its soul or its monarchy. So he abolishes serfdom, dabbles in education reform, and even lets local assemblies, the Zemstvos, pretend to have opinions. In St. Petersburg, you might even hear people speak of progress, softly of course. The walls have ears. But change is a slippery eel. For every freed peasant, there's a landowner charging double. For every new school, a factory belching smoke into childhood lungs, and lurking beneath it all, a slow-burning fury, a sense that the reforms are too little, too late, and too condescending. You start to notice young men and women in reading circles, hunched over Marx, Herson, Bakunin. They call themselves Narodniks. They dream of revolution, and they are very, very bad at keeping secrets. One of these idealists is a bright-eyed student with a coat 3 sizes too large and a bomb in his coat pocket. On March 13th, 1881, he tosses it under the Tsar's carriage. It doesn't work, but then, like any good sequel, a second bomb hits the mark. Alexander II's legs are shredded, his body bleeding into the cobblestones of his own progress. You see the crowds gather. Some weep, others just stare. The liberator is gone, and with him, the fragile possibility that Russia might reform itself into a decent place without blowing everything up first. His son, Alexander III, has absolutely no patience for dreams. He is not his father. He is not here to tinker. He is here to control. You feel it instantly, like a cold wind, tightening every muscle in your body. Universities are shackled. Presses are censored. Jews are targeted with new restrictions. Autocracy is not just restored, it is celebrated, like a bad sequel, rebooted with a bigger budget and fewer morals. The Okhrana expand their operations. Whispering becomes an extreme sport, and still, the empire sags under its own contradictions. In the alleys, young men swap samizdat, illegal pamphlets typed by candlelight. In drawing rooms, aristocratic daughters argue philosophy with alarming fluency. You can't quite tell what will spark first, but you know something smouldering, and in the shadows, the children of the 1881 assassins grow up. They study in exile. They memorize slogans. They plot. One of them, by the way, is a boy named Vladimir. His older brother tries to kill the new Tsar in 1887 and gets himself hanged. You imagine that letter reaching young Lenin, the ink smudged with grief and rage. He doesn't cry. He studies. He reads every line of Descapitar like it's scripture, and somewhere deep in that overdeveloped brain, the idea forms, if Russia won't evolve, maybe it needs to be torn apart and rebuilt from scratch. Historians still argue whether Alexander II's reforms were Russia's last real chance to change peacefully. Some say he lit a path that could have led to constitutional monarchy. Others claim his reforms were so flawed they only delayed the inevitable implosion. But you, standing in this wintry swirl of hope and despair, feel only one thing: time slipping, like snow through gloved fingers. By the 1890s, Russia is a patchwork of possibility and repression. The cities expand, the railroads stretch like veins, and the workers multiply angry, tired, and increasingly organized. Meanwhile, the countryside remains a medieval stage play. Priests chant, landlords swagger, and peasants pray for either rain or revolution, whichever comes first. It's an empire that pretends it's immortal, but bleeds from every corner. You walk past onion-domed cathedrals and bullet-pocked tenements. You hear laughter in salons and screams in prisons. And far away, in dusty corners of Europe, Russian exiles sharpen their manifestos and wait. Tonight, the revolution still sleeps, but it dreams in red. You wake to the sound of bells echoing through a grey morning, royal bells summoning an empire to celebrate, or at least pretend to. It's 1894, and the mood is stiff with unease. Somewhere behind ornate cathedral doors, a 26-year-old man with a moustache, as fragile as his authority, is being crowned Nicholas II, emperor and autocrat of all the Rossias. You watch him kneel, bow, rise. He's doing all the right moves, but you can't help but wonder if he's wondering what on earth he's doing. Nicholas was never meant to rule like this. His father, Alexander III, was a human wall, a man who drank power like kvass and had the glare of a Siberian bear. Nicholas, by contrast, is more fragile, not weak necessarily, but unsure, polite, too polite. You can already hear whispers in the palace halls. He doesn't inspire fear, he inspires sympathy, and Russia doesn't run on sympathy. During the coronation, a celebration at Korinka Field turns sour. A rumour spreads about free beer and gifts, and suddenly the crowd surges like a tidal wave. Over 1,000 people are trampled to death. It's a bad omen, and Nicholas, bless him, attends a ball that same evening. The optics are not, shall we say, ideal. Some see a boy playing Tsar while blood dries on the parade grounds. The people begin to murmur. Nicholas II rules an empire that stretches across 11 time zones, but can't seem to govern a conversation without a stumble. He believes in divine right, not as metaphor. He literally believes God chose him, and if God says you're Tsar, who are you to question anything? You, on the other hand, start to notice the cracks. The army is outdated, the nobles are out of touch, and the peasants are, well, still peasants, but now they're angry peasants with pamphlets. He marries Alexandra, a German princess, who loves him with a devotion that borders on the tragic. She's smart, pious, and deeply, catastrophically awkward. The Russian court doesn't trust her. She doesn't trust them back. And this chilly, mutual suspicion will, soon enough, boil into something darker. But for now, they play house in a palace of ghosts. You walk through the corridors of the Winter Palace, where chandeliers sparkle and servants hover like shadows. Nicholas prefers family time to statecraft. He dotes on his daughters, plays with his son, and writes letters to Sunny, his beloved Alexandra. It would be sweet if it weren't also, running a collapsing autocracy. Outside, the empire doesn't care about candlelit evenings or lace dresses. Famine bites, workers strike, exiles plot. You pass a factory in St. Petersburg where men scream about hours, pay, and dignity. The police arrive, batons swing, someone bleeds. This is the real empire, steel, soot, and suffering. Still, Nicholas insists on autocracy. When reformers beg for a national assembly, he offers vague nods and then quietly tightens censorship. He believes Russia needs discipline, not democracy. Historians still argue whether he was naive, idealistic, or simply overwhelmed by the weight of the throne. You watch him at his desk, lost in reports, hoping the numbers will behave better than the people. And then, as if things weren't precarious enough, war looms on the horizon. Japan, a rising industrial power, with a chip on its shoulder, eyes Russia's Far Eastern ambitions with deadly intent. In 1904, war breaks out, on paper, a chance for glory, in practice, a humiliation. You stand aboard a Russian battleship as it lurches blindly toward the Tsushima Strait, manned by officers who think maps are suggestions. The Japanese Navy, efficient and modern, annihilates the Russian fleet like a cat swatting at toy ships. It's a national embarrassment wrapped in logistical catastrophe. And it does something dangerous. It makes people start to ask whether the Tsar is blessed by God or just really bad at his job. Back in Russia, strikes escalate. Protest becomes routine. A priest named Father Gapon leads a peaceful march to the Winter Palace to deliver a petition. You're there, in the crowd, clutching an icon and a slice of stale bread. You don't shout. You don't fight. You just want to be heard. The Cossacks open fire. It's January 22nd, 1905. Bloody Sunday. Over 100 dead, many more wounded, all of them now convinced that the Tsar doesn't see them as children of God, but as targets. Whatever divine glow Nicholas carried, it dims into shadow. You see people fall to their knees, not in prayer, but in rage. The revolution hasn't arrived yet, but it has sent an RSVP, and the Tsar, he barely understands what's coming. You drift now through the cramped, smoky air of a Swiss cafe, where ideas smell sharper than the coffee. The year is 1903, and a cluster of Russian exiles huddle around a scratched table, arguing with the desperate intensity of people who believe history hinges on their every sentence. In the middle of this Marxist murmuring sits a man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, Vladimir Lenin. He doesn't look like much, with his receding hairline and that almost comical goatee, but the atmosphere bends around him like metal drawn to a magnet. You lean in. Lenin isn't interested in waiting. He doesn't want reforms. He doesn't want debates. He wants revolution, the full scorched earth kind. He believes Russia must leap over capitalism, straight into socialism, because why take the scenic route through misery? But not everyone agrees. Another exile, Julius Martov, pushes back. He wants a broader party, something democratic, more inclusive. The meeting erupts into one of those exhausting, ideological fistfights, where no one throws a punch, but everyone walks out bruised. In the end, the party splits. And so, with all the solemnity of a bad band breakup, the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party becomes two groups, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, and the Mensheviks, led by Martov. Historians still argue whether the split was inevitable, or just the result of two men with egos slightly larger than the Eurasian steppe. You suspect both. Lenin names his group Bolshevik to imply majority, even though they aren't. It's classic Lenin. If the truth isn't useful, you simply outmaneuver it. Meanwhile, back in Russia, things are simmering toward a boil. After Bloody Sunday, 1905, becomes the year the empire flinches. Strikes spread like wildfire. Sailors mutiny on the battleship Potemkin, tossing officers overboard with the kind of revolutionary flair you only get in montage sequences. You're there, ducking behind a barrel, watching a nation begin to twitch awake. Nicholas II, faced with actual physical revolution, decides to blink. In October, he issues a manifesto promising a Duma, a National Assembly. It sounds good, it sounds modern. It sounds like someone told him, "You have to do something, Your Majesty." But the Duma, when it finally appears, is more theatre than government. Nicholas retains veto power. He dissolves it the moment it gets sassy. He's like a magician who pulls a rabbit from a hat, then shoots it for being too opinionated. Still, the revolution of 1905 marks a shift. You sense it in how people walk now, faster, more confident, more defiant. The spell of Tsarist invincibility is broken. The empire limps forward, but it limps with a pronounced ideological limp. And amid this strange interlude of half-freedom and full disappointment, you find a new presence slinking through the shadows. Grigory Rasputin. Ah yes, him, a Siberian peasant with oily hair, piercing eyes, and a reputation for mystical healing that would have made any self-respecting wizard roll his eyes. Rasputin enters the royal orbit through Alexandra, who's desperate for a cure to her son Alexei's hemophilia. Rasputin prays, or chants, or hypnotizes. Historians still argue which, and the boy improves. Coincidence, divine intervention, Excellent PR. You catch whispers in the palace corridors. Ministers mutter, generals cringe, nobles blush. Rasputin drinks, seduces, blesses and meddles, all while cultivating a carefully dishevelled aura of holy madness. Alexandra clings to him. Nicholas looks the other way, and the public slowly begins to wonder if the empire is being run by a barefoot mystic who smells like goats and stares too hard at your wife. The revolutionaries, meanwhile, are not impressed. You pass Lenin again, now bouncing between exile cities like a Marxist nomad, writing essays, plotting alliances, and fuming that the revolution hasn't yet happened. His tone sharpens. He attacks the Bolsheviks in print with a venom that makes modern internet feuds look like love letters. For Lenin, it's not enough to oppose the Tsar. You have to oppose anyone who opposes the way he opposes the Tsar. It's exhausting, but effective. Back in Russia, the Duma shuffles forward, each iteration weaker than the last. You see hope flicker and fade with every broken promise. The countryside groans with debt. The cities wheeze with smog. Rasputin whispers, Lenin writes. And somewhere deep beneath the crust of this uneasy calm, tectonic plates shift. You walk through a marketplace in 1912, the air thick with smoke and something else, dissatisfaction maybe, a foreboding sense that the clock is ticking louder. You pass a newspaper stand and catch a headline about a miners' strike in Lena. Soldiers open fire, hundreds dead. The old pattern again, dissent, repression, outrage. The revolution hasn't returned, but it's checking the calendar. You fall asleep that night to the rustle of newspapers and the creak of palace floors, aware that something is coming, not yet, but soon, so very soon. The wedding bells of 1894 rang more like funeral chimes if you listened closely enough. Somewhere beneath the gold-domed opulence and imperial satin, you felt a tremor of discomfort. Alexandra, born Alex of Hesse, a shy, devout German princess, was not a match made in political heaven, at least not by Russian standards. Her Orthodox conversion was received like a slightly embarrassing confession at a royal dinner party. Her accent, her reserve, and her icy poise didn't exactly scream beloved mother of the nation. But Nicholas loved her. Oh, did he love her? And that, you realize, was both touching and politically catastrophic. You watch her settle into the role of empress, with all the ease of a bear being trained for ballet. Court society, already bloated with snobbery and tradition, sniffed at her every move. She smiled too little, spoke too quietly, wrote too much to her husband, and worst of all, she didn't flirt with the ministers like a proper socialite. Historians still debate whether her standoffishness was pride, fear, or simply introversion, weaponized by politics. Whatever the cause, you could cut the chill in the palace halls with a knife. But at the heart of it all, Alexandra was something far more dangerous than cold. She was sincere, and in a court built on smoke mirrors and occasionally poisoned tea, sincerity was like a candle in a dry barn. She truly believed in Nicholas's divine right to rule. She saw criticism as blasphemy, not just disloyalty. Every rumor against him struck her like a personal betrayal. And when her beloved son Alexei was born with hemophilia, a blood disease that turned bruises into death sentences, her entire fragile world collapsed into superstition. You walk with her through the echoing halls of the Alexander Palace. Night after night, she prays beside her son's bed, hands clutched white, eyes hollow with desperation. Doctors whisper of inevitability. But then Rasputin enters. You remember him, of course, the enigmatic peasant from Siberia, with a reputation for miracles and morals as loose as his robe. Alexandra met him through a mutual friend, because of course Russia's royal family took healing advice from aristocrats with a flair for the dramatic. The first time Rasputin visited the palace, Alexei calmed, his bleeding stopped. Or seemed to. Coincidence, divine intervention, power of suggestion. Historians still can't agree, but Alexandra didn't hesitate. Rasputin was sent by God, period. You watch her clutch Rasputin's letters like scripture. She believes he's the only one who truly understands her pain, who can shield Alexei and therefore the dynasty from doom. Soon, the stinking mystic becomes not just a guest, but a fixture. Ministers come and go. Rasputin stays. And here's where the plot thickens, faster than borscht in January. The nobility loathes him. The public is scandalized. Cartoonists have a field day. Rumors swirl that Rasputin controls the government through seances and pillow talk, that he sleeps with the empress, that he bathes in vodka and communes with demons. You overhear it all in taverns and train stations. The empire, it seems, now has a holy man as its shadow prime minister, and he isn't even wearing socks. Meanwhile, Alexandra withdraws further from society. She trusts fewer and fewer people. Every minister who disagrees with Rasputin is dismissed. Every general who questions her judgment is replaced. Nicholas, ever the gentle husband, lets it happen. You can see it in his eyes. He wants peace at home, even if it means chaos in the government. You watch him sip tea with his daughters while Rasputin advises on military appointments. The disconnect isn't just palpable, it's historical malpractice. By 1914, as Europe teeters on the edge of war, Russia's internal structure resembles a house built of ice cubes in July. The nobility mocks the Tsarina in coded poetry. The Duma sputters impotently, and through it all, Rasputin offers spiritual advice between swigs of wine and vaguely unsettling winks. You sit in a crowded train car and hear two peasants argue. One swears Rasputin is the only reason the heir hasn't died. The other says Rasputin is the reason the empire will. Somewhere between them, the truth squirms uncomfortably. But Alexandra doesn't see a manipulative mystic. She sees a lifeline, and if he's odd or unwashed or politically radioactive, well, God sends help in strange packaging. Besides, haven't the clean politicians failed her over and over again? As you drift off to sleep, you can feel the court's tension tighten. Rasputin laughs, the empress prays, and Nicholas smiles faintly, unaware that the woman he adores and the man he tolerates are quietly steering the empire toward the edge of a very steep, very bloody cliff. Snow falls like silence over Petrograd. It's January 1905, and you're standing in a sea of woolen coats and fur hats, where prayers hang frozen in the air. The crowd is massive. Workers, women with children, old veterans with medals, pinned to threadbare coats. They hold icons, portraits of the Tsar, and carefully worded petitions. There are no torches, no pitchforks, just hope, or maybe naivete. It's hard to tell the difference in Russia. You shuffle forward, not knowing that this day will stain the empire's conscience forever. At the front of the crowd walks Father Gipon, a priest with a revolutionary soul and a truly majestic beard. He believes, quite sincerely, that the Tsar just doesn't know how bad things have gotten, that if he sees the people, if he reads their humble petition, his heart will melt. Spoiler, it won't. You pass the frozen canal. The Winter Palace gleams in the pale morning light. Soldiers line the gates, rifles angled slightly downward. A warning, or a promise. You hear a murmur ripple through the crowd. Don't worry, the Tsar loves us. He's a father to the people. Then a command, then shots. The silence shatters. You can't tell who fires first, only that it doesn't stop. Bullets crack across the square, ripping through banners, icons, backs. Screams rise. People run, fall, stampede. Bodies drop in heaps. The snow stains red, then black. You dive behind a statue. Father Gapon disappears in the chaos, his faith in the Tsar torn to ribbons along with the petition. This is Bloody Sunday. Later that night, you huddle beside a stove, numb in body and spirit. The official reports will say a few dozen dead. Eyewitnesses will say hundreds, maybe more. Either way, something dies that day that no report can measure. The illusion is gone. The Tsar is no longer the people's father. He is a butcher, or at least a coward in a crown. and the people don't forget. Across Russia, strikes explode like fireworks. Rail workers, miners, printers, all shutting down the machine. Revolution isn't organized yet, but it doesn't need to be. It rolls forward like an avalanche of grievances that have waited too long to be voiced. Sailors aboard the battleship Potemkin mutiny, throwing their officers into the sea. You watch them raise the red flag and realize that history has officially stopped asking permission. Nicholas II, shocked and vaguely irritated, does what he always does. Too little, too late. He offers a Duma, an elected assembly. But don't get excited. He keeps veto power and appoints half of it himself. It's like promising someone a bicycle and delivering a painting of a bicycle instead. You feel the collective eye roll of a generation. Still, people vote, candidates campaign, the air smells faintly of possibility. Then the first Duma gets too mouthy and is dissolved. The second Duma too. The third, stacked with monarchists. By the fourth, it's mostly wallpaper. But amidst the chaos of 1905, something else is born. The Soviets. Not the USSR kind. Not yet. These are workers' councils, popping up spontaneously in cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. You attend one just to listen. People argue, plan strikes, share tea and rumors. It feels alive, it feels dangerous, and it terrifies the monarchy. The revolution fizzles by 1907, partly because the army remains loyal, partly because the leaders aren't coordinated, and partly because Nicholas's secret police, the Okhrana, are disturbingly effective at showing up right before things get interesting. But the damage is done. You can't put that genie back in its vodka bottle. Meanwhile, in exile, Lenin watches it all with cold, simmering rage. He's angry the revolution failed, yes, but more angry at his fellow Marxists. The Mensheviks, he insists, are too soft, too democratic, too trusting of workers to self-organize. Lenin doesn't want discussion. He wants a disciplined vanguard, a party of professionals who will seize power like a locksmith, picking the door to history. You imagine him pacing a shabby apartment in Geneva, writing, rewriting, fuming, never smiling. Historians still argue whether the 1905 revolution was a dress rehearsal or a missed opportunity. Some say if the Tsar had embraced constitutional reform then, Russia might have become a monarchy like Britain, a bit fusty but functional. Others believe repression was inevitable, given the regime's DNA. But you, standing in the smoky quiet of a half-rebuilt square in 1906, feel only the tension of things not finished. The wound is scabbing over. Yes, but beneath it, infection. And Rasputin, he's thriving, with the revolution momentarily on pause. The mystic star rises higher. You hear rumors of his trysts, his toasts, his midnight appointments. The nobility gossip. The press sneers. But Alexandra swears by him, and Nicholas, as always, does nothing. So the empire limps forward, wounded but defiant, with a Tsar in denial, a Tsarina in spiritual debt, and a population increasingly fluent in the language of rage. You're seated at a wooden table, barely large enough for the coffee stains and manifestos sprawled across it, and you're watching a revolution fragment into syllables. It's 1903 again. Yes, we're backtracking slightly, because no great Russian epic is complete without flashbacks and betrayals, and the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party is splitting faster than a poorly baked pierogi. You're in the middle of the infamous Second Congress, watching grown men with questionable hygiene argue over one simple, world-altering question: how exactly should one start a revolution? At first, it seems harmless enough. Some want a broad-based party with open membership, like a revolutionary book club. Others, mainly one Vladimir Lenin, think that's adorable but idiotic. Lenin believes in a small, tightly controlled group of professionals who eat, sleep, and dream, dialectical materialism, the kind of people who memorize footnotes for fun and can quote Marx with the fluency of a church choir singing psalms. When the vote happens, it's close, narrow, even. But Lenin's side wins. So, with the kind of flair that only revolutionaries can muster, he names his faction the Bolsheviks, meaning majority, even though they're, well, not. The others become the Mensheviks, or minority, even though they're not that either. You realize this is less about math and more about messaging. Lenin, as always, knows that reality bends for the one who names it first. From that point on, the ideological schism is more than just paperwork. It's personal. You listen to Lenin rip into the Mensheviks in essays that read like political diss tracks, icy, surgical, unforgiving. He doesn't just want to defeat them, he wants them humiliated, corrected, and ideally erased. Trotsky, still unaffiliated, still shopping for a side, calls Lenin's style dictatorial. But even Trotsky can't help admiring the focus, the fire, the sheer gravitational pull of Lenin's certainty. Meanwhile, the Mensheviks, led by Julius Martov, preach a more democratic, flexible revolution. They believe workers should grow into socialism, not be led there like sheep by a philosophical shepherd. They attract intellectuals, moderate activists, and the kind of people who enjoy meetings that go 3 hours too long. You attend one. It's polite, passionate, slightly tedious. You miss the danger, the spark you felt reading Lenin. And then in 1912, the two factions make it official. The split becomes a divorce. Separate parties, separate newspapers, separate futures. You can't help but feel like you're watching two trains on parallel tracks, both aiming for the same destination, but with wildly different engineers and timetables. At the same time, another party is quietly gaining traction, the Socialist Revolutionaries, or SRs. Unlike the Marxists, who worship industrial workers, the SRs focus on peasants, the vast, mud-covered majority of the Russian population. They dream of land reform and justice through agrarian socialism. They're idealistic, rooted in older revolutionary traditions, and occasionally very into assassination. You meet a few of them, friendly folks, carry oddly shaped packages. You're standing in a printing press in Kiev when a newspaper comes off the roller hot with headlines, another minister blown up by an SR cell. The state retaliates, predictably, with arrests, trials, exiles, but every crackdown births 10 new grievances. It's a cycle so absurd you start to wonder if Russia is secretly a tragic opera being written in real time. And then there are the anarchists, small, scattered but loud. They make pamphlets, they throw bombs, they believe in nothing but the end of everything. You meet one at a train station, he gives you a cookie and a monologue about Bakunin. The cookie is stale, the monologue is worse. Back in exile, Lenin watches all this with thinly veiled disdain. He views the SRs as romantics playing with fire. The Mensheviks, soft, the anarchists, amateurs, only the Bolsheviks, he believes, have the clarity and discipline to pull Russia through the eye of the revolutionary needle. But not yet. The time isn't ripe. The workers aren't ready. The Tsar is still breathing. So Lenin waits, he lectures, he writes, he feuds. You read his letters, which are like Molotov cocktails disguised as paragraphs. He builds a network across Europe, Switzerland, France, Germany, a web of idealists, smugglers and secretaries. The Bolsheviks aren't large, but they are precise, efficient, tightly wound. And while all this theoretical warfare rages, the Russian people continue to trudge through life, as if no one in Zurich is debating their future. The peasants farm, the workers strike, the army drills, but beneath the routine, a strange sense of inevitability hums. Something is coming, not yet, but it's forming in shadows and syllables. Historians still argue whether Lenin's obsession with party discipline was visionary or tyrannical. Some say it made the revolution possible. Others say it sowed the seeds for the very authoritarianism the revolution claimed to fight. You, watching Lenin tighten his grip, feel a chill that isn't entirely political. By 1914, as Russia prepares to march into the fires of World War, the Bolsheviks are still small, marginal, mostly ignored. But you sense it. They're coiled like a spring, waiting for their moment. And in the Tsar's palace, as the candles flicker against stained glass. That moment inches closer. You walk through a corridor that smells of beeswax and incense, lit dimly by chandeliers that never seem to stop trembling. It's not quite day, not quite dream. Somewhere deep in the Winter Palace, Rasputin has just finished another healing session, which, depending on whom you ask, is either a miracle, a scam, or an elaborate excuse to drink with the Empress. By now, you know him. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin, the holy man, the wanderer, the unkillable whisper that has slithered into the very heart of Russian power. His beard is longer, his eyes more hypnotic, his presence utterly unavoidable. It's 1912, and Rasputin is now an institution. Ministers come and go. Rasputin stays. Court ladies avoid eye contact. The Tsarina clutches his notes like gospel. And Nicholas shrugs. He doesn't like Rasputin. Not really. But he loves Alexandra, and if Rasputin keeps her calm, keeps their son alive, even if it's placebo or miracle or vodka-fueled superstition, then who is he to interfere? You follow Rasputin through a garden cloaked in frost. He walks like a man convinced of his own invincibility, which, to be fair, is a belief largely confirmed by his daily survival. His enemies are legion, the nobility, the church, the Duma, the press. But Rasputin, with the oily grace of a circus escapee, dodges them all. He blesses babies. He drinks with generals. He stares at people until they stop talking. Back in St. Petersburg, now renamed Petrograd, because nothing says modernizing monarchy like awkward linguistic nationalism, the whispers grow louder. You overhear them in salons, in cafes, in the drafty offices of minor bureaucrats. Rasputin sleeps with the Empress. Rasputin controls the army. Rasputin bathes once a season, and only in sins. None of it is proven. All of it is believed. And the press? Oh, the press feasts. Cartoons show him as a spider on Alexandra's lap. Editorials call him the mad monk. Even members of the Duma plead with Nicholas, exile him, restrain him, at least make him bathe. Nicholas sighs and files the complaints under too complicated. Meanwhile, the empire's actual problems gather like storm clouds. Inflation ticks upward. Food shortages nibble at the edges of cities. Strikes swell, then explode. The army grumbles. The peasants mutter. The national mood is less glorious autocracy and more quiet existential dread. But the palace, still a bubble. A very anxious, Rasputin-scented bubble. You stroll into one of Alexandra's parlours. It's dark. The curtains are drawn. The furniture seems heavy with grief. She writes letters, dozens of them, to her friend. She believes Rasputin sees what others don't, that he protects Alexei not only from bleeding, but from destiny itself. You want to believe her. You really do. But it's hard when the man she trusts most is currently throwing a party with Cossack dancers and half the vodka in Petrograd. Historians still argue whether Rasputin actually had any real influence on state decisions. Some say he was the puppeteer behind Alexandra, who in turn influenced Nicholas. Others say his political advice was limited to vague spiritual ramblings and an occasional suggestion to be nice to that one guy. Either way, perception is power, and Rasputin had it in spades. And then, as if summoned by the ghosts of every poor imperial decision, war arrives. It's 1940. Austria-Hungary invades Serbia. Alliances activate like cursed dominoes. Russia mobilizes. Because honor, because Slavs, because reasons. You feel the lurch of inevitability as Petrograd fills with troops and flags. At first, the war is popular. Parades, speeches, even Rasputin, strangely, predicts it will be a disaster, which, shockingly, doesn't make it any less of one. The Russian army is large, brave, and chronically underprepared. Rifles are scarce, boots scarcer. You meet a soldier who's told to wait until someone dies before taking their weapon. He laughs like a man who has stopped believing indoors. And when the defeats begin, massive, bloody, humiliating defeats, guess who gets blamed? Not the generals, not the supply chain, not the outdated tactics. No, it's Rasputin, always Rasputin. He becomes a symbol, a scapegoat, a kind of living meme of everything wrong with Russia. Foreign agents, dark magic, sex, heresy, take your pick, he is all things to all paranoias. You walk past a bakery with a queue that stretches into next week. Mothers whisper curses, students chant slogans, even loyalists flinch. The war, the shortages, the incompetence, it's all blending into one thick stew of national exasperation. And Rasputin, for all his mystical posturing, cannot pray away a collapsing empire. But in the palace, Alexandra clutches his letters tighter. Nicholas, distracted by front-line reports and half-empty dispatches, continues to defer. Rasputin's presence grows. So does the loathing for him. And somewhere, in the shadows, a group of nobles begin to whisper, not just about removal, but about murder. You feel the air grow colder, heavier, the capital murmurs with revolution, and in the centre of it all a mystic winks, blesses, drinks and dances, still convinced that the end isn't coming. It is. The drums of war echo through the spires of Petrograd, and you find yourself among a throng of cheering citizens on a July day in 19. Patriotism is the air's new cologne, loud, sweaty and temporary. Russia has mobilized. The empire is at war with Germany, and for the first time in years, the people aren't yelling at the Tsar, at least not yet. You're swept up in a parade of banners, mustaches, and freshly minted uniforms, watching young men laugh too loudly, as if they could outrun what's coming. The posters promise honor, the priests promise heaven, the newspapers promise victory. You, being slightly more experienced in the delicate matter of Russian optimism, promise yourself not to get too attached. At first it's all speeches and symbolism. Nicholas II appears on balconies, waving like a porcelain doll brought to life. The church bells toll, the Duma pledges loyalty, even the revolutionaries, while the less committed ones fall silent for a moment. War, after all, has a way of shoving internal chaos to the back burner. But reality, as always, refuses to read the script. Within months, the Russian army is bleeding in Prussia. The Battle of Tannenberg is less a battle than a military-themed tragedy. You're on a hill, watching two generals argue over maps they don't trust, and signals that don't arrive. One of them orders a charge with the enthusiasm of a man playing chess underwater. 30,000 men vanish in smoke and confusion. It's a disaster so complete, even the Germans are surprised. And yet Russia keeps marching. You meet soldiers who share rifles, like their family heirlooms. Some are sent to the front without boots. Some don't get bullets until after their first retreat. Just wait, one officer tells you. Someone will die, then you'll be equipped. Efficient if you're heartless. Still, the army fights and dies. By the end of 1915, over 2 million Russian soldiers are dead, wounded or missing. 2 million, the kind of number that stops being human and becomes something you try not to think about when eating soup. Back home, the initial war fervour curdles into something bitter. Bread lines grow longer. Factories can't keep up. Inflation eats wages like a plague of locusts. You walk through Petrograd in 1916, stepping over rats and muttered curses, watching mothers trade linens for flour. There's no meat. There's no sugar. There's barely hope. Nicholas, in a bold move inspired by either bravery or a complete misreading of his job description, takes personal command of the army in 19. He leaves the capital to play general. He is not a general. You watch him salute at railway stations, his uniform crisp, his strategy non-existent. This leaves Alexandra in charge back in Petrograd, which means, let's be honest, Rasputin is effectively running the empire. Ministers are appointed, dismissed, reappointed, and dismissed again, depending on whose aura Rasputin finds pleasing that day. Some last week's, others hours. You begin to suspect the real government is being conducted via seance. The people are restless. The nobility is panicked. Even the church, once Rasputin's reluctant defender, begins to edge away. You hear nobles whispering in corners, "If only he were gone. Someone must do it. Surely the Empress would recover her senses if—" Historians still argue whether Rasputin's influence was direct policy or just psychic radiation. What's clear is that his presence, and Alexandra's defense of it, shatters what little faith the elite still have in the monarchy. The Tsar is off playing soldier, the Tsarina is praying over telegrams, and the empire is cracking. In December 1916, the whispers become plans. Prince Felix Yusupov, a noble with more money than restraint, invites Rasputin over for dinner. You're there. Well, hiding in the pantry. Rasputin eats cakes laced with poison. He doesn't die. He drinks wine laced with poison. He doesn't die. Yusupov, confused and slightly terrified, shoots him. Rasputin falls, then gets up, then is shot again, beaten, and finally dumped in the icy river. It takes him hours to die, if the stories are true. Longer still to stop haunting the palace. You walk through Petrograd the next morning. No one weeps. Some cheer. Some say it's too late. Some say it's not enough. And they're right, because the empire is still at war. The people are still starving, and the Tsar, bless his deluded heart, is still convinced that things will settle down soon. Any day now, really. But you feel it, that strange pressure in the air, the thing that happens right before the world tips sideways. It's not a revolution, not yet, but it's coming, and this time it's not bringing slogans, it's bringing the storm. You trudge through snow that crunches like shattered glass beneath your boots. It's early 1917, and Petrograd is a city on the brink. The buildings seem to lean inward, as if they too are tired of the wind. The war drags on, hunger has become a daily ritual, and everyone's looking for someone to blame, preferably someone royal. Nicholas II, as you know, is still at the front, trying to play general with all the tactical genius of a man assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. He receives updates from the capital, updates that sound suspiciously like someone editing the apocalypse into a bedtime story. Everything's under control, they say. It isn't. It never was. In Petrograd, Alexandra has taken over more than just tea service. With Rasputin gone, her paranoia blooms. Ministers rotate like bad waiters in a cursed restaurant. She writes long, breathless letters to Nicholas, telling him not to worry, not to return, not to listen to the Duma. She still believes the monarchy is sacred, that the people are loyal, that this is a storm that can be prayed away. You walk past bread lines that stretch like serpents through the snow. Women wait for hours, children clinging to their skirts. When bread does arrive, it's mouldy, overpriced, or both. Fights break out. You see soldiers called in, not to protect the people, but to control them. That goes about as well as you'd expect. By February, the city is vibrating with tension. Rumors swirl about strikes, mutinies, even a plot to storm the palace. The weather turns warmer, snow turns to slush. Revolution, it seems, prefers spring. On March 8, February 23, by the old calendar. Because yes, Russia still used a calendar from the Julian era. Because why not? The match is struck. It starts with women, textile workers, mothers, factory girls, marching through the city to demand bread. Peace and bread, they shout, down with the Tsar. It is not the first protest of the war, but it is the first that doesn't go away. You join them, swept into a current of anger that feels almost joyous, like a fever breaking. More workers pour into the streets. Trams stop. Factories shut down. Soldiers are ordered to fire, and some do. But others hesitate. You lock eyes with a young recruit, his rifle trembling. He lowers it, walks away, joins the crowd. The Tsar, meanwhile, is still at the front, staring at telegrams and hoping the problem resolves itself before tea. He orders more troops to Petrograd. By the time they arrive, many of the ones already there have switched sides. The Duma, sensing an opportunity somewhere between necessity and desperation, forms a provisional committee. In a move that's either bold or suicidal, they send a delegation to the palace. The goal: convince Nicholas to abdicate. The time for divine right has expired. You're in the train car when they deliver the message. He listens, tired. He's not angry. He's not even surprised, just numb. Like a man whose ship has finally sunk and he's been treading water so long he forgot he couldn't swim. On March 15, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicates the throne, not just for himself, but for his son Alexei. The crown passes, briefly, hypothetically, to his brother, Grand Duke Michael, who takes one look at the situation and politely declines. You don't blame him. Who wants to inherit a sinking lifeboat? Just like that, the Romanov dynasty, 304 years of opulence, orthodoxy, and occasional state-sponsored disasters, ends not with a gunshot, but with a signature. You feel it deep in your bones. Something enormous has shifted. The people cheer in the streets. Flags change. Portraits vanish from walls. The word citizen replaces subject, and for a moment, a fleeting, fragile moment, it feels like anything is possible. But revolution, as you're learning, is not a finish line. It's a door. Behind it, chaos. You exhale into the chill of a Petrograd evening that smells faintly of smoke, printer's ink, and tentative hope. It's spring of 1917, and the empire is no more. What stands in its place isn't quite a new order, but a waiting room full of people trying to figure out whose turn it is to rule. The monarchy has collapsed, and the throne is gone, but the velvet cushion is still warm. The provisional government steps into the power vacuum, like a substitute teacher into a riotous classroom, underqualified, overly optimistic, and already regretting every decision. Formed by liberal nobles and moderate socialists, it promises reforms, elections, and, crucially, to keep Russia in World War I, because apparently no one at headquarters has opened a map or a morale report in months. You sit in on one of their meetings in the Toyardi Palace. There's polite discussion, worried glances, and a general atmosphere of, maybe if we just speak calmly enough, the revolution won't eat us. They abolish the death penalty. They announce universal suffrage. They plan a constituent assembly. On paper, it's dazzling. On the streets, people are asking why there's still no bread. And then there's the Soviet. Yes, the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies, a parallel institution that rises from the revolutionary ashes like a second, shaggier phoenix. It has real influence, a louder voice, and actual support from workers and soldiers. It's democratic, chaotic, and full of committees. Lots and lots of committees. You wander between the two buildings, the provisional government drafting laws no one reads, the Soviet issuing orders no one obeys. It's what historians now call dual power, but to you it feels like a two-headed creature arguing with itself while slowly sinking into mud. The Soviet issues Order Number 1, instructing soldiers to obey the Soviet, not the provisional government, unless orders align. Translation: the army now answers to whoever shouts loudest. You hear mutiny in the wind. It smells like kerosene and bad decisions. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this moderate dithering, someone starts muttering Lenin's name again. Vladimir Ilyich is still in exile, sitting in Switzerland, playing revolutionary chess with an empty board. But he's watching, waiting, writing. When news of the Tsar's abdication reaches him, he doesn't cheer, he scowls. Because to Lenin, this isn't the revolution, it's the opening act. The bourgeois have taken power, yes, but the proletariat, still waiting, still hungry, still ready. Back in Petrograd, the provisional government dithers some more. They delay land reform, they delay peace talks. They declare that Russia is now a republic, but with no clear mandate or constitution. You see it in the people's eyes, hope turning to confusion, confusion to doubt. Kerensky emerges as a star, a lawyer with dramatic flair and a fondness for oratory. He straddles both camps, working with the provisional government, while also cozying up to the Soviet. You watch him give a speech from a balcony, arms wide, hair perfect, voice trembling with patriotic fire. The crowd claps. Then someone asks when the war will end. He doesn't answer. Because the war, you see, is the iceberg under this entire Titanic of a government. The front is still a mess. Soldiers still die by the thousands. The peasants back home still want land. The workers still waiting for factories to improve. The Soviets, they're trying to keep order. The provisional government, they're trying to keep their chairs. And into this swirling, fragile chaos comes a sealed train, rattling across Germany like the ghost of revolution itself. Lenin is on board. Germany, ever the opportunist, has decided that sending him into Russia is cheaper than fighting Russia. You can almost hear the Kaiser chuckling over the map. On April 3rd, 1917, Lenin arrives at the Finland station in Petrograd. You're in the crowd as he steps off the train. Short, intense, eyes like steel wire. He waves awkwardly, then launches into a speech that stuns even the radicals. No cooperation, no war, no support for the provisional government. His slogans are simple, punchy, and terrifyingly effective. Peace, land, bread, all power to the Soviets. You feel the room shift. Some cheer, some gasp, some blink, like they've just realized they're standing in the path of a hurricane. Historians still argue whether Lenin was brilliantly opportunistic or merely lucky. Was his arrival the moment the revolution truly began, or simply when it stopped pretending to be polite? You don't know, but you feel it. The electricity, the impatience, the crackle of something immense moving beneath your feet. The Tsar is gone, but the empire still burning. You wake to the clatter of boots on cobblestones and the scent of cabbage soup turned revolution. It's February 1917, by the old calendar still dragging its heels through history, and Petrograd is no longer just a capital, it's a powder keg. The cold has lifted slightly, but in its place comes hunger, outrage, and that giddy panic you only get when people realize the old world is finally, truly falling apart. The streets are alive with protest. Workers walking out of factories, soldiers slipping off their posts, students flinging leaflets like confetti. It begins, as all great Russian disruptions do, with women. International Women's Day, to be precise. They march first for bread, then for dignity, then for everything. You follow them, elbow to elbow, in a crowd that grows louder with every corner turned. They chant, they clap, they demand. It's not a riot yet, but it smells like one waiting for an excuse. You duck into a bakery, just as a fight breaks out. No bread. Again, a soldier watches through the window, rifle slung, face unreadable. Then he shrugs, walks outside, and joins the crowd. It's that kind of day. By now the Tsar is 100 miles away, poring over war dispatches, and firmly believing that the capital just needs a little discipline. He sends in more troops. It's charming, really, how he still thinks troops follow orders just because they wear uniforms. Inside the Duma, panic blossoms behind musty curtains and unpaid electricity bills. The politicians scramble, most of them suddenly remembering they've always had very serious doubts about the monarchy. A provisional committee is formed, but it's less a plan than a lifeboat, and this lifeboat already half sunk. Meanwhile, in the Petrograd Soviet, the atmosphere is equally frantic, but with better rhetoric. Workers and soldiers elect deputies by the hour. You sit through speeches that would make a poet cry, a soldier cheer, and a bureaucrat faint. But it's not just theatre. The Soviet has real teeth. Order number 1 is passed, telling soldiers to obey only Soviet commands. It's not just mutiny, it's mutiny with a letterhead. You wander the streets at twilight, watching statues of the Tsar come down, hearing cheers echo between crumbling mansions and half-lit street lamps. This isn't just rebellion, it's metamorphosis. The empire is molting, shedding its skin in a frenzy of improvisation and adrenaline. You half expect the buildings themselves to shift shape. By March 2's March 15, for you Gregorian fans, Nicholas II abdicates. You're there, barely able to hear the announcement over the din of relief and disbelief. He steps down, not just for himself, but for his son. The Romanovs, after more than 3 centuries, are done, or so everyone thinks. Historians still argue whether Nicholas had any other choice. Some say he could have reformed, could have handed over power without a revolution. Others insist he was doomed from the moment he trusted divine right more than public need. You decide both can be true. An emperor can mean well and still steer straight into disaster. And what of the people? You meet a man who spent 30 years fearing the Okhrana, and now he hands out leaflets in the open, like a boy skipping school. A teacher finally uses the word democracy in class, without whispering. A factory girl dances in the street to music she swears she hears only in spring. But beneath the euphoria is a flicker of dread. The provisional government is in power, but barely. They've inherited a kingdom of rust and kindling, and no one's quite sure which match will light next. They refuse to exit the war. They delay land reform. They issue declarations as if hope were a matter of paperwork. Meanwhile, the Soviet gains power. Lenin is still abroad. Trotsky is still on his way. The Bolsheviks, a tiny minority barely noticed by the generals or the journalists. But you know better now. You feel it in the rhythm of the city, the way crowds part around certain figures, the way slogans echo longer than speeches. And through it all, the Romanovs sit in quiet exile under house arrest. Nicholas writes in his diary, mostly about the weather and family meals. It's tragically mundane. You almost pity him. Almost. As spring thaws into summer, Petrograd pulses with contradictions. There's music and marches, joy and gunfire. The revolution has no plan, just momentum. And as every Russian knows, momentum doesn't pause. It collides. You step into a palace that no longer belongs to anyone. The rooms are quiet, the chandeliers dimmed, the silence less regal and more resigned. The Romanovs, once wrapped in silk and certainty, now live under house arrest. It's March 1917, and the empire they ruled over like gods has dissolved into committee meetings and queuing for bread. Nicholas II, for his part, takes it all with a baffling calmness. He writes daily in his diary, mostly about tea, the children's colds, and the garden. Not the revolution, not the abdication, not the empire that just vanished like fog at sunrise. It's as if history is happening outside the windows, and he's chosen not to notice. You sit in the corner, watching him feed the family dog, and wonder if denial, this complete, is a form of nobility or madness. The provisional government allows them to stay for now in the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo. It's comfortable, if a bit less opulent, like being downgraded from first class to economy with velvet curtains. But the real downgrade isn't immaterial, it's metaphysical. Once divine, Nicholas is now citizen Romanov. Alexandra is no longer empress, but simply a mother, her letters uncensored, her prayers unanswered. And yet the family stays tight. You see it in the way they huddle over breakfast, walk in the garden, read aloud in turns. Alexei's hemophilia flares, and there's no Rasputin to chant away the pain. The daughters, once poised for dynastic marriages, now sew clothes and clean floors. The illusion of monarchy dissolves stitch by stitch. Outside the palace, Russia convulses. The provisional government tries to hold the reins, but they're tangled in contradictions. They claim to rule, but they can't command the army. They promise reform, but they postpone land redistribution. They preach unity, while the Petrograd Soviet issues rival orders. You can practically hear the revolution laughing in 2 voices. And the Bolsheviks, still a whisper, still fringe, still plotting. But whispers, in a vacuum, carry. Meanwhile, pressure builds around the Romanovs' presence. The royal family is a symbol, one that could inspire monarchist counter-revolutions. Some in the government want to send them abroad, others say it's too dangerous. Britain, once their closest ally, awkwardly withdraws its offer of asylum, something about public opinion, war priorities, and not wanting to host the ghost of an empire. So the Romanovs remain. Then, in August 1917, the family is moved to Tobolsk, deep in Siberia, a quiet exile, where it's hoped they'll be forgotten. You travel with them on a train that seems to sigh at every turn. The town is small, cold, the house modest, the guards polite. For now, the days blur. Nicholas chops wood, the girls write journals. Alexandra clutches hope like it's a letter from God. Historians still argue whether the move was mercy or preparation. Some say the provisional government just wanted them out of the way. Others whisper darker suspicions. Either way, you feel the frost creeping closer, not just the Siberian kind, but the moral chill that comes before something irreversible. The world shifts again in October. Lenin returns, the Bolsheviks rise, and suddenly there's a new sheriff in town. The provisional government falls, not with a bang, but with a gentle push and a confused shrug. Kerensky flees, Soviets take over, and the Romanovs, still in Tobolsk, still waiting for a decision that won't be theirs. The Bolsheviks debate what to do. They don't want the monarchy restored, but executing the family, that's extreme, even for Lenin, at least publicly. The world watches, but the world is also distracted. France burns, Germany gasps, the US waffles. And you sit by the window in Tobolsk, watching the snow bury the fence posts deeper each morning. The children laugh sometimes. The guards shift. The family prays. It is a strange kind of purgatory, quiet, domestic, and unbearably tense. They don't know it yet, but they've already stepped off history's map. The train screeches into Petrograd like a prophecy on wheels. It's April 1917, and you're standing at the Finland station when Lenin returns. Not as a celebrity, not even as a conqueror, but as a question mark with a very sharp pen. The crowd cheers, some unsure why. Others whisper that he's a German agent. A few just want to see what madness looks like up close. He steps off the train looking like a man who hasn't smiled in years, and doesn't intend to start now. He's dressed modestly, hunched slightly, and his eyes flash not with charisma, but with calculation. You feel it instantly. This isn't a man chasing power. This is a man certain that power is already his. It just doesn't know it yet. He barely nods before launching into a speech, the kind that jolts even seasoned radicals. No support for the provisional government, he declares. Peace, land, bread. It's less a speech and more a thesis with slogans. But the crowd stirs. You can see it. The shock, the hunger, the sudden realization that someone is willing to say what they've all been half thinking. Lenin doesn't just criticize the government. He declares it illegitimate, temporary, obsolete. He insists the Soviets, not the ministers, not the generals, should hold all power. And as he speaks, the room shifts from disbelief to devotion. You can almost hear the balance of power crack. The April theses, published days later, are short, punchy, and politically radioactive. End the war immediately. Give land to the peasants. Nationalize banks. No cooperation with other socialist parties. Just Bolshevism, pure and undiluted. Historians still debate whether Lenin crafted them on the train or had them in his back pocket all along. You suspect he wrote them years ago and just waited for the right lighting. The Bolsheviks, until now a minority, even among radicals, suddenly look less like cranks and more like prophets. Their meetings swell, pamphlets fly, slogans stick. All power to the Soviets isn't just a phrase, it's a drumbeat, a lullaby for the restless. You attend a factory meeting where a foreman quotes Lenin like scripture. The men nod, the women nod, even the manager looks unsure. In a revolution where everyone talks, Lenin's clarity is oxygen. Others hedge, he commands. Others propose, he demands. And yet the rest of the left is horrified. The Mensheviks call him divisive. The SRs accuse him of sabotage. Even some Bolsheviks blink slowly and ask, "Are we really doing this?" Lenin doesn't blink. He never does. Kerensky, now a minister in the provisional government, tries to steady the ship. He speaks beautifully, gesturing like a Shakespearean actor, calling for patience and unity. But his promises of reform ring hollow. The war continues. The land isn't redistributed. The food doesn't come. You can smell the rot under the rhetoric. In the barracks, soldiers debate whether to return to the front or just go home and claim land before someone else does. In the countryside, peasants begin seizing estates, informally of course. You join one such group as they liberate a noble's manor. No one weeps. A goat takes up residence in the drawing room. The revolution, it turns out, doesn't wait for policy. Meanwhile, Lenin digs in. He floods Petrograd with speeches, essays, pamphlets. He refuses compromise, even when it costs him allies. You hear him say, "History will not forgive delay," and you believe him, not because he's right, but because he's terrifyingly sure. And then there's the German question. Everyone knows he came through Germany, funded even by German money. The provisional government hints at treason. The press whispers, but Lenin shrugs. "If I'm a German agent," he says, "then so was Marx." It's the kind of line that sounds absurd, until you realize no one wants to be the one who laughed at the future. By summer, the Bolsheviks are no longer marginal. They are magnetic. Workers join. Soldiers desert to join. Even disillusioned Mensheviks trickle in, muttering apologies. The provisional government watches, nervously. Kerensky waves his arms. Trotsky returns from exile. The stage is now crowded, loud, and tipping. But Lenin is patient. He doesn't strike yet, not because he fears the government, but because revolutions, like bread, need time to rise. For now the slogans are enough. Peace, land, bread, all power to the Soviets. You hear them echo in the factories, in the trenches, in the pages of pamphlets printed by candlelight. They are not just promises, they are the drumbeat of something coming. And you start marching in time. You sit in a smoky back room, listening to a man named Djugashvili speak with the calm of someone who knows he's being underestimated. His voice is low, almost bored, but his eyes don't blink. You know him as Stalin now, though at this stage most people don't know him at all, which is exactly how he likes it. He's not the fiery orator like Trotsky. He doesn't have Lenin's intellectual magnetism. He's not even particularly memorable, but he's there, always there, quiet, constant, and slowly building something beneath the noise and headlines. Before all this, he was robbing banks. Well, expropriating, as the Bolsheviks called it, a fancy revolutionary term for stealing with ideological flair. In 1907, he helped orchestrate the Tiflis bank robbery, walking away with more cash than most revolutionaries would see in a lifetime. No one quite knew how he pulled it off. You suspect even he forgets the details, but the legend grows nonetheless. Now, in 1917, Stalin has traded banditry for bureaucracy. He's on the Bolshevik Central Committee, but not making speeches or grabbing headlines. He edits Pravda, the party newspaper, crafting each sentence like a scalpel. You watch him at his desk, cutting lines that seem harmless but contain just enough venom to stick. While Trotsky is leading debates and Lenin is tossing rhetorical grenades, Stalin builds networks, regional connections, party loyalties, favors exchanged like poker chips. He knows who delivers the pamphlets, who controls the trains, who organizes the printers in Tula. He knows who owes him and who doesn't yet realize they will. The revolution is full of loud men. Stalin is not loud, but you feel him weaving through the corridors like smoke. The other Bolsheviks view him as useful, bland, forgettable, a functionary in a trench coat. Historians still argue how wrong they were, and when exactly they realized it. You follow him to a party congress meeting in June, held in a room that smells of dust, sweat, and the remnants of imperial chandeliers. The debates are long, passionate, exhausting. Stalin says little, but what he says always passes, always gets logged, always becomes policy. It's not charisma, it's inevitability. Later, you sit near him during a break. He smokes quietly, listening more than speaking. When he does speak, it's in short, sharp phrases. No poetry, just facts. He talks about grain supplies, internal party discipline, the importance of controlling provincial Soviets. While others talk revolution, Stalin talks logistics. You begin to understand he doesn't want to lead the revolution. He wants to survive it. And so he waits. While Trotsky electrifies crowds, Stalin ensures the meetings happen on time. While Lenin plans the next seizure of power, Stalin ensures the typewriters work, the guards are paid, the posters arrive. You could mistake him for a middle manager if you weren't paying attention. But you are, and you know better. Meanwhile, the Bolsheviks are not yet in control. July brings chaos. Demonstrations erupt. Angry, massive, uncoordinated. Workers flood the streets, demanding immediate Bolshevik leadership. It's the July days, and it's too soon. Lenin panics. The government responds with arrests. The moment, it seems, has passed. Stalin again is silent. He doesn't flee like Lenin. He doesn't get arrested like Trotsky. He hovers. He negotiates. He survives. You walk through Petrograd and feel the tension returning. The revolution is not linear. It stumbles. It second guesses. The provisional government breathes again. Kerensky preens. But the Bolsheviks are not gone. They've just learned something invaluable. Timing matters. So does control. And Stalin continues to gather his threads. No drama, no flair, just quiet, methodical threading of influence. Historians will one day debate whether he was always planning to rule, but you, watching him close a ledger with the finality of a coffin lid, are pretty sure the question is moot. He doesn't chase power. He prepares for it, and when the moment comes, he won't need to grab it. He'll already be holding the door. Section 16. The city wakes to gunfire that sounds like it's arguing with the sunrise. It's October, well, technically November, if you've converted to the Gregorian calendar like a rational person, but no one's really keeping track anymore. The date is October 25th, 1917, and you're in Petrograd, which is either about to become a glorious workers' paradise or a cautionary tale etched in ice. Lenin has returned from hiding, clean-shaven now, like revolution is a job interview he plans to win. He wears a cap, a borrowed coat, and an expression that suggests the time for discussion ended sometime around 1903. Trotsky stands beside him, fierce and theatrical, directing soldiers like a conductor on a caffeine bender. You stand beside them in the Smolny Institute, once a school for noble girls, now a revolutionary command center with better acoustics and significantly more shouting. The provisional government, still occupying the Winter Palace, is unaware or in denial that history is folding around them like cheap wallpaper. Kerensky rides out that morning in a borrowed car, searching for support, and vanishes into irrelevance. It's almost poetic. The Bolsheviks move fast. Red Guards, factory workers, and mutinous sailors seize railways, telegraph offices, bridges. You trail behind them through alleys and boulevards as they meet only scattered resistance. It's less a battle and more a carefully coordinated burglary of power. The city doesn't erupt, it sighs. And then there's the Winter Palace. You walk through the square, past shadows cast by flickering street lamps and ancient columns. The palace stands still, grand, empty, symbolic. Inside, the provisional government clings to its dignity, surrounded by a few loyal cadets and the eerie quiet of being on the wrong side of inevitability. The storming, if you can call it that, is both chaotic and awkward. There's confusion about entrances. Some Red Guards get lost in the corridors. The signal to attack is delayed. someone fires a blank by accident. It's less a dramatic siege and more a historical blooper reel. Still, by early morning, it's over. The ministers are arrested. No last stand. No heroics. Just a quiet, stunned realization that the old order, already half dead, has now been gently rolled into a ditch. Lenin emerges later to announce what everyone already suspects. We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. You're in the crowd when he says it. There's cheering, yes, but also silence, a held breath, as if even the revolution itself is unsure whether it's actually happened. The next day, Lenin introduces decrees like playing cards, one for peace, one for land, immediate withdrawal from the war, redistribution of estates, the end of private ownership. You can hear the scribes scrambling to keep up. History is moving faster than handwriting allows. Historians still argue whether the October Revolution was a coup or a popular uprising. The truth lies somewhere in the fog, like most Russian mornings. The Bolsheviks weren't the majority, but they were the most organized, the most ruthless, the most ready. And now they rule. But ruling, you quickly learn, is not the same as revolting. The Sovnarkom, Lenin's new Council of People's Commissars, begins issuing orders, but the bureaucracy groans like an old gate. Nothing functions. Railroads collapse. Banks refuse to open. The streets are lawless in that particularly Russian way, grim, slightly theatrical, and wrapped in wool. You attend a meeting where Trotsky mocks the Mensheviks. You are pitiful, isolated individuals. You are bankrupt. Your role is played out. Go where you belong, from now on into the dustbin of history. It's dramatic, petty, iconic, and it lands like thunder. The opposition walks out. The Bolsheviks stay. Power, it turns out, goes not to those who argue best, but to those who stay in the room after everyone else leaves. And Stalin, still quiet, still in the shadows, watching the others shine. But you don't forget he's there, because power is his native language, and the storm is just beginning. You drift through the halls of the former Smolny Institute, now transformed into the buzzing nerve center of Soviet power, where every room smells like candle wax, ink, and the faint musk of historical urgency. It's late 1917, and the Bolsheviks, once dismissed as radical nobodies, are now responsible for an empire that's unraveling like a badly knitted scarf. They've seized power. But power, you discover, doesn't come with instructions or heating. The Sovnarkom, the new Council of People's Commissars, is half-functioning at best. Meetings stretch until dawn. Lenin sleeps on benches, Trotsky yells at generals, and half the decrees are written on scraps of whatever paper survives the freezing nights. You sip tea from a cracked cup, while a comrade explains grain requisitioning, then falls asleep mid-sentence. But Lenin? He's euphoric, purposeful, obsessed with speed. Decree after decree. Abolish private land ownership, nationalize the banks, pull Russia out of the war. It's revolutionary maximalism on fast forward. You watch him write like a man racing death. Perhaps he is. The decree on peace stuns the world. Lenin offers immediate armistice to all belligerents, calling for an end to imperialist war. You're in the crowd when he reads it aloud, calmly, plainly, like someone announcing the end of snow. No annexations, no indemnities, just peace, or at least a performance of it. Germany, for its part, is confused but intrigued. The Soviets send a delegation to Brest-Litovsk, a name that will soon become shorthand for political surrender in multiple languages. The negotiations are a farce. Trotsky, who leads the delegation, stalls for time, believing a German workers' revolution is just around the corner. It isn't. The Germans, unimpressed by socialist optimism, keep marching. By March 1918, the Soviets sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The terms are brutal. Russia loses Ukraine, the Baltics, Finland, and more. Lenin shrugs. We must close our eyes and sign. Better to survive than bleed. You hear him say it, and you feel the weight of it, the terrible clarity of a man willing to amputate to save the body. The opposition is furious. Even inside the party there are grumbles. Capitulation, some whisper. Cowardice. But Lenin does not care. He is not building a country. He is building a future. And then there's the civil war. You smell it before you see it. The land fractures. Red versus white. Bolsheviks against monarchists. Liberals, foreign interventionists, and just about every group who dislikes being told what to do by men in dusty coats, quoting Marx. The whites have money, guns, generals, but they lack unity. They fight each other as often as they fight the Bolsheviks. They promise to restore order, but no one remembers what that even looked like. The Reds, by contrast, are poor, hungry, and desperate, but they have something far more dangerous, belief. And Trotsky, he becomes the architect of the Red Army, forging order from chaos with equal parts charisma and terror. You watch him roll up to front lines in a train painted like a Gothic novel, delivering rousing speeches, followed by casual executions. Soldiers salute, or else. Historians still argue whether the Red victory was due to superior strategy, or simply the whites being too chaotic to function. Some say Trotsky's brilliance saved the revolution. Others say geography did. Most major cities remained under Bolshevik control. You suspect both are true, along with something darker, because terror becomes policy. The Cheka, the secret police, emerges like a shadow with teeth. They knock at night. They ask no questions. You see lists. You see families disappear. You see Lenin justify it as revolutionary necessity. And you realize utopia is a thing with bloodstains. Meanwhile, famine looms. Grain requisitioning begins. Peasants who supported the revolution now hide their harvests. The Bolsheviks respond with force. The countryside burns. The cities starve. Petrograd, once the heart of empire, becomes a ghost town where even the rats seem to carry manifestos. Still, the Bolsheviks endure, because in a land broken by centuries, sometimes the promise of tomorrow is stronger than the pain of today. And Stalin. He's not yet the face of anything, but you see him in the reports managing grain deliveries in Tsaritsyn, organizing military logistics, gaining reputation as a fixer, a doer, a man who finishes things. No headlines. Just progress. You're standing on a train platform in 1919, somewhere between hope and exhaustion, watching a carriage roll in coated with frost and slogans. The Red Army's command train, Trotsky's traveling revolution, is painted with stars, slogans, and sometimes actual blood. Inside, Trotsky himself looks like a man auditioning for every role in history at once. Strategist, prophet, executioner, and occasionally reluctant theatre critic of his own propaganda films. He leaps from the train and into action, rallying exhausted conscripts with a voice that could wake the dead, or at least momentarily distract them from their trench foot. You follow him along the front lines as he reorganizes chaos into hierarchy, invents ranks, demands loyalty, and orders summary executions, with the kind of calm that suggests he's reading from a grocery list. This is the Civil War's ugliest phase. Reds versus whites, brother against brother, ideology against confusion. You step over bodies in Kazan, dodge bullets in Kiev, and watch entire towns flicker between allegiances, depending on who burned less grain. There are no clean sides. The whites are monarchists, liberals, nationalists, Cossacks, and foreign troops, all united mostly by their hatred of Bolsheviks and their inability to agree on lunch orders. And then there are the Greens, peasant militias who trust neither side, armed with pitchforks, rifles, and deep resentment. You watch one ambush a red convoy for stealing grain, then a white one for the same reason. They fight for land, food, survival, not for slogans. If the revolution is an opera, the Greens are the orchestra, playing off sheet, defiantly out of tune. The Red Army is ruthless. but it learns fast. Trotsky introduces discipline. Stalin, now rising in the party's military ranks, handles brutal regional assignments with the charm of a blizzard. In Tsaritsyn, later to be Stalingrad, he enforces grain collection and political loyalty with such force that even Lenin raises an eyebrow. But Stalin's results speak louder than his methods. And Lenin is increasingly deaf to objections that don't end with victory. Petrograd and Moscow become shells of themselves. Power and privilege now mean access to food. You watch intellectuals trade poetry for potatoes. University halls echo with silence and scurrying rats. Theatres stage operas to half-empty rooms for audiences wearing threadbare coats and eating crusts. And the Cheka, oh the Cheka, the revolution's unofficial exclamation point. They operate from anonymous buildings and knock only when it's too late. You stand outside Lubyanka and watch families wait for names, for news, for miracles. They rarely get them. Some are arrested for counter-revolutionary thoughts, others for owning more than one pair of boots. Paranoia becomes patriotic. Historians still argue how much Lenin knew about the full extent of the Red Terror. Some say he directed it with clinical precision. Others say it spiraled beyond his control. But you read his notes, shoot the saboteurs, no mercy to kulaks, and you realize this isn't a temporary measure. It's a blueprint. In 1920, the war begins to tilt. The whites fracture further. Allied support dries up. Cities once lost are retaken. You arrive in Crimea just as the final white bastion falls. Rangel, the last general, flees by ship. His followers, those lucky enough, escape with him. The unlucky ones meet the Red Army's final accounting. The war has cost millions of lives. It has turned cities to rubble and families into ashes. But it has given the Bolsheviks one unshakable advantage: survival. And with survival comes legitimacy, at least the kind that arrives with bayonets. But peace doesn't bring relief. It brings the famine of night. You walk through the Volga region and see nothing but dust and ribs. Crops failed. War communism emptied storehouses. The peasants who dreamed of land are now dying on it. Children chew leather. Mothers bury more than they name. International aid trickles in. Even the US sends food. But the Bolsheviks are suspicious. Charity is dangerous. Starvation, somehow, feels more controllable. Inside the party, debate simmers. Should they loosen the reins? Let peasants sell surplus grain? Retreat from full communism to survive? Lenin, ever the pragmatist, masked as a purist, proposes the new economic policy, NEP, a temporary retreat, a half-step back to capitalism. The word is never said out loud, but the markets reopen, small businesses revive, black markets turn semi-legal, and the revolution, briefly, exhales. You walk through Moscow and see cafes again, children laughing, men selling apples beside posters of Marx. The contradiction is jarring, but survivable. Stalin, still quiet, still climbing, appointed General Secretary in 19... A boring title, an invisible crown. But you, having watched him stitch his name into every seam of power, know what it means. The Civil War is ending, but the real battle for the soul of the revolution has only just begun. You're standing in the Grand Hall of Columns in Moscow in 1924, beneath chandeliers that once illuminated imperial balls, and now reflect only silence. Lenin is dead. His body lies in state, waxy and still, while outside a line stretches for miles through snow and sorrow. Workers, peasants, bureaucrats, all wrapped in layers of wool and disbelief, shuffle forward to glimpse the man who bent an empire to his will. You remember him as fire, urgent, sharp, uncompromising. Now he's a monument, and everyone, especially those who once disagreed with him, suddenly swears they loved him most. The party is in mourning, but beneath the black armbands and solemn speeches, the gears of succession are already grinding. You can feel it in the way comrades eye one another, how hands linger too long on Lenin's writings, as if they might reveal a hidden endorsement. And then there's the testament. Whispers begin before the paper even sees daylight. Lenin, in his final months, dictated a set of notes, his thoughts on the future of the revolution, on the dangers ahead, on the personalities circling his bed like ideological vultures. Trotsky, brilliant but arrogant, too quick to dismiss others. Zinoviev and Kamenev, unreliable. Bukharin, likable but too soft on capitalism. And Stalin, too rude, Lenin wrote, and this defect becomes intolerable in a secretary-general. He recommends Stalin's removal. You read it and feel the chill of prophecy, but the testament never reaches the public, at least not properly. It's read aloud in hushed tones to party delegates, then buried. No one wants to be the first to act on Lenin's last warning. It's awkward, it's dangerous, and besides, Stalin is already there, already in the room, already taking notes. Stalin's position as General Secretary sounds innocuous: paperwork, appointments, bureaucracy. But in a system where the party is everything, control of the party's internal machinery is control of everything. Who gets promoted? Who gets exiled? Who gets remembered? You watch him quietly build alliances. First with Zinoviev and Kamenev, the very men Lenin distrusted, to isolate Trotsky. Together they paint Trotsky as an elitist, an outsider, too obsessed with theory and not loyal enough to Lenin's memory. Trotsky, for all his intellect, stumbles. He skips Lenin's funeral, citing illness, some say real, others say politically fatal. Stalin gives the eulogy instead. The optics are perfect. The crowd weeps. Stalin, in his thick accent and stiff posture, becomes the custodian of Lenin's legacy. Over the next months, the party reshuffles like a nervous card trick. Stalin plays factions against each other with the patience of a man assembling a chessboard, one pawn at a time. You see Zinoviev and Kamenev realize too late that they've helped elevate a man who has no intention of sharing power. Trotsky is gradually pushed out of leadership, his speeches interrupted, his ideas dismissed. Eventually, he's exiled, first internally, then externally. You see him leave with books under one arm, and a look that says he's still sure he's right, even if history doesn't seem to agree. Meanwhile, Stalin preaches socialism in one country, a sharp contrast to Trotsky's permanent revolution. It's practical, contained, palatable, a way to rebuild without exporting chaos. Historians still argue whether Stalin believed in it or simply used it to disarm his rivals. But it works. The party consolidates. Opposition fragments, and Stalin's grip tightens. You walk through the Kremlin late at night, past dim offices where files grow thicker and trust thinner. The revolution feels less like a flame now, and more like machinery. Iron, heavy, unstoppable. In 1928, Stalin launches the first 5-year plan. The NEP, with its gentle market logic and brief breath of capitalism, is over. Grain requisition returns, this time faster, harsher, colder. The countryside flinches. And you finally understand. The revolution is no longer about promise. It's about permanence. The smoke from Moscow's chimneys blends with the rising dust of construction. It's 1929, and the Soviet Union is no longer an idea. It's scaffolding, steel, statistics. You stand at the edge of a worksite where a cathedral once stood. Now it's rubble and rebar, destined to become the palace of the Soviets, or so the blueprints claim. The revolution has entered its industrial phase. Romanticism is out. Quotas are in. Stalin, now fully in control, launches the first 5-year plan like it's a war. And in many ways it is a war against time, against backwardness, against anything that doesn't fit the model of a perfect socialist state where tractors sing and workers smile through gritted, rationed teeth. Factories erupt where forests stood. Entire cities are invented. Magnitogorsk, for instance. One day a hill, the next a metropolis of blast furnaces and exhaustion. You walk its muddy streets, hear the clang of metal, the bark of orders. People live in tents, eat turnips, and quote Lenin, while laying pipes with frost-bitten hands. Productivity becomes a sacred word. Workers are expected not just to labor, but to overperform. Enter Alexei Stakhanov, the miner who allegedly extracted 14 times his quota in one shift. Posters bloom across the USSR. Be like Stakhanov. It's less encouragement, more threat. Meanwhile, collectivization grips the countryside with fingers made of concrete. Stalin declares war on the kulaks, the so-called wealthier peasants, which in practice includes anyone with more than one cow. You watch as grain is requisitioned, livestock slaughtered, villages emptied. We are liquidating the kulaks as a class, Stalin announces, with all the subtlety of a man cancelling a birthday. Peasants resist. You see it everywhere. Barns burned, grain hidden, children smuggled across borders. The Red Army responds with rifles and deportations. Entire families vanish into the east, to labor camps with names like afterthoughts. Historians still argue if it was necessary modernization or calculated terror. You suspect it was both. The trains don't care either way. Then comes the famine. In Ukraine, the fields are bare, not from drought, but from policy. Quotas remain impossible, punishments fierce. Peasants starve in homes, surrounded by government grain. Parents barter their last possessions for bread, some their last humanity. The Holodomor, it's later called, a word whispered slowly, like it might ignite. You walk through villages where no dogs bark, no birds sing, just wind. Stalin denies it, of course, blames sabotage. Foreign journalists are shown model farms and carefully staged tractor parades. Some believe him, others don't survive long enough to write about it. Back in the cities, the party declares success. The press praises heroic workers. New art, new music, new architecture, all celebrating the new Soviet man, a tireless, selfless, completely fictional being. You see statues rise faster than apartment blocks. And always the purges loom. At first it's whispers, this bureaucrat removed, that official dismissed. Then, in 1934, Sergei Kirov is assassinated. A popular Bolshevik, some say a threat to Stalin. The official story is confusion. The unofficial one is more like math. One bullet equals tens of thousands of arrests. You attend a party congress where delegates clap for Stalin. So long their hands bleed. No one wants to be the first to stop. Silence is suspicious now. Everything is suspicious now. The NKVD, the secret police, compile lists. People vanish in the night. Trials are staged. Confessions written in advance. The accused admit everything. Espionage, sabotage, dreaming incorrectly. You sit through a show trial where a man sobs while praising Stalin between pleas for his life. Even old Bolsheviks are not spared. Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, all executed. Trotsky, exiled and defiant, calls it betrayal. Stalin calls it justice. The revolution eats its parents. And the people? They adjust. They adapt. You meet a woman who denounces her brother to the NKVD and weeps every night. A boy who volunteers to inform on his schoolteacher. Patriotism and fear become indistinguishable. Historians will one day call it the Great Terror, but you call it ordinary, because by now it is. Still, Stalin smiles in portraits. Grain output rises on paper. Cities sparkle on posters, and the workers march, singing songs whose lyrics they barely believe. You stand at the edge of Red Square and realize the revolution didn't end. It just changed clothes and kept walking. The ink on the final confession hasn't dried when Stalin begins planning another speech. It's 1938, and you're sitting in the back of a cavernous hall where applause sounds more like artillery. Every face around you claps with the enthusiasm of survival. You clap too, partly from fear, partly because after 20 years of revolution, clapping is one of the few certainties left. Stalin is now unopposed, not just politically, but cosmically. He exists above the party, above the state, above contradiction. His moustache appears on posters more often than the hammer and sickle. Children recite poems about him. Artists sculpt his profile into stone. His paranoia is no longer a rumor, it's a governing principle. You see him walk the corridors of power, nodding slightly, never rushing. Files pass through his hands. Names become fates. A mark in the margin might mean a medal or a bullet. Even his allies flinch when he enters a room. But there's peace of a sort. The purges slow, the labor camps fill, then overflow, then become an institutional reality. The NKVD evolves into an empire of shadows. Siberia hums with forced labor. Some build railways, others dig for gold, most simply disappear. In schools, you hear the revised histories. The revolution, you're told, was always led by Stalin. Lenin fades into the background of portraits. Trotsky vanishes from textbooks entirely, erased not just from power, but from memory. It's as if he never existed. A magic trick, only it ends with ice picks instead of applause. Meanwhile, the world changes. In Germany, a man with a moustache, nearly as rigid as Stalin's, rises to power. Hitler and Stalin eye each other across Europe, like wolves, pretending to be trees. You listen to foreign broadcasts, whispers of alliance, rumors of war. Then, in 1939, the unimaginable happens. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. You're in the room, well, one of the rooms, when it's announced. The USSR and Nazi Germany signing a non-aggression treaty, dividing Eastern Europe like dessert at a cursed dinner party. Poland is split, the Baltics assigned, and the rest of the world stares blinking. Stalin calls it strategy, others call it sacrilege, but it works, for a while. When Hitler invades Poland on September 1st, 1939, Stalin waits 2 weeks, then sends Soviet troops in from the east. The world watches the USSR and Nazi Germany carve up a nation. You walk behind a Red Army column entering Lviv, the townsfolk watching with the quiet dread of people realizing that neutrality was never an option. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin calculates. He builds up industry, relocates factories, strengthens the army sort of. After all, he'd purged most of the senior officers, which turns out to be a terrible long-term staffing policy. In 1940, the USSR invades Finland. The Winter War is supposed to be a cakewalk. It isn't. Finnish troops fight back with skis, cunning, and sheer indignation. You trudge through forests where red soldiers freeze in mismatched boots. Eventually the Soviets prevail, but not without humiliation. Stalin, you note, doesn't like humiliation. He makes lists afterward. By now, the USSR is massive, paranoid, industrialized, and exhausted, but stable, terrifyingly stable. The party is no longer a collective, it's an echo chamber. Debates are gone, elections are theatre. You see a delegate cast a vote with shaking hands. There's only one candidate, but still, he hesitates. In Moscow, you walk past the new metro stations, palaces of marble and light, designed to dazzle, to distract. Stalin tours one, nods once, and moves on. Above ground, ration lines. Underground, chandeliers. Historians still argue, was Stalin's rise inevitable? Did the revolution birth him, or did he hijack it? You listen to the arguments and realize the truth is simpler and more terrible. The revolution gave Stalin a map, and he redrew it in his own image. By 1941, everything seems under control, which in Soviet terms usually means something catastrophic is about to happen. And sure enough, on a quiet summer morning, without warning, Hitler breaks the pact and sends millions of troops across the Soviet border. Stalin, for once, is caught off guard. You see it in his face. You hear it in the silence that follows. The next chapter is war, but that, for tonight, can wait. The wind smells like smoke and diesel, and the sky hangs low over Moscow in June 1941, as if it knows what's coming before Stalin does. Operation Barbarossa begins not with a declaration, but with artillery. At dawn, 3 million German troops pour into Soviet territory in the largest invasion in human history. The earth itself seems to convulse. You sit in Stalin's office, a place once thick with decisive mutterings and ink-stained plans, now silent. He says nothing for hours. His pipe rests untouched. His generals shift nervously. Some think he's planning, others fear he's broken. After years of absolute control, he meets the one thing that refuses to be managed: surprise. The Germans move fast, too fast. Minsk falls, then Smolensk. Kiev is encircled. Whole Soviet armies vanish. Stalin finally speaks, and when he does, it's not fear you hear, it's resolve. He gives the infamous July speech, "Comrades, citizens, brothers and sisters." It's the first time he addresses the people directly, and they listen, because for the first time in decades, he sounds human. The Soviets dig in, not for ideology, not even for Stalin, but for survival. You ride in a train full of women and children, evacuated eastward, while their fathers stay behind with rifles and vodka. You pass villages where trees are stripped to build barricades, where churches hold rifle cleaning classes, where priests bless Molotov cocktails. The Germans reach the gates of Moscow by October. The snow comes early, like a divine intervention with icicles. The Wehrmacht isn't ready. The Soviets, miraculously, are. Factories dismantled in the summer now hum in the Urals. Supplies trickle in from the west, and the Red Army counterattacks. You watch as frostbite fights bullets, and soldiers charge with cries that sound more like curses than slogans. Then comes Stalingrad. You descend into the city street by shattered street, cellar by cellar. It's 1942, and the air is a symphony of fire and ruin. Every wall is a front. Every floor is a battlefield. You hide with soldiers in the rubble of a factory, where rats and grenades are equally common. The Germans throw everything they have. The Soviets refuse to die. The tide turns, slowly, bloodily. By 1943, the Red Army pushes west. You follow them through villages reclaimed by force, where the welcome is cautious and the stories are unbearable. The German retreat is not clean, it is vengeful. Stalin, now emboldened, tightens his grip even further. Every gain must serve the narrative. Every victory must shine through censorship. Back in Moscow, parades celebrate the return of lost cities. But there are no tears of joy, just fatigue. The war has eaten everything. Sons, homes, certainty, and still it demands more. You cross into Poland with the Red Army in 1940. What you see in the liberated camps haunts even the most hardened veterans. Auschwitz, Majdanek. The horror is so vast it quiets even the NKVD. But only for a moment. Stalin's concern is not justice, it's control. How the story will be told. Who will be the hero? Who gets forgotten? Then, Berlin, April 1945. You walk past crumbling Reich buildings, under red banners. The war ends. The world gasps. The USSR emerges victorious, scarred, brutal, unbroken. Stalin becomes not just a leader, but a myth. He redraws Europe with Churchill and Roosevelt, like boys dividing toys. Eastern Europe becomes a Soviet shadowland. Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Poland, all liberated, then aligned. The Iron Curtain descends. Back home, Stalin tightens his grip even further. The war becomes his legacy, his justification. Critics vanish again. So do heroes. Even war generals like Zhukov are sidelined. There is only one sun in the sky, and it wears a moustache. The 1940s fade into the 1950s with ration lines and secret police. Stalin's paranoia reaches its apex. The Doctor's plot in 1953, another fabricated conspiracy. You hear the whispers. Arrests loom, another purge is coming. But this time, it stops. Because Stalin dies. March 5, 1953. A stroke. The man who rewrote the century succumbs not to rebellion or bullet, but to his own body. Moscow freezes, stunned. Crowds mourn, some truly, others out of habit. A few in secret dare to exhale. You stand by his coffin, flowers, medals, silence, and beneath it all, the question, what now? Because Stalin, for all his terror, held the system like gravity. With him gone, nothing will fall the same way again. But that can wait. And now, with the embers of revolution fading into ash, your breath begins to slow. You've walked through palaces turned prisons, through fields gone hollow with famine, through the firestorms of war and whispers of betrayal. You've seen dreams forged in steel and shattered by fear. You've seen hope wear boots and terror wear medals. The Russian Revolution promised a new world. What it delivered, well, that depends on where you stood and how long you survived. You saw Lenin's vision blaze bright and burn fast. You felt Trotsky's speeches crackle with urgency, and you watched Stalin, slow, methodical, relentless, reshape the nation with silence, exile, and 1,000 signed orders. It wasn't just a change of regime. It was a transformation of reality itself. And now, as the last banners are folded, the last monuments cast, you step back from the century-long stage. The voices dim, the marble halls echo only with memory. The slogans lose their sharpness. The cold wind of Moscow is softer now, and the footsteps of history grow distant. So let your eyes drift closed. Let the weight of all you've seen settle gently. No more marching, no more manifestos, just sleep. Let the revolution rest for tonight. You've earned the silence.